The lighthouse beam swept across the fog every 12 seconds. Coast Guard Inspector Sarah Chen counted the intervals as she climbed the iron stairs, her flashlight beam cutting through salt, thick air that smelled wrong. Not the clean brine of ocean, but something organic and rotting underneath. The beam passed overhead again. 12 seconds exactly. It had been exactly 12 seconds for the past 73 years according to the maintenance logs. No variation, no drift, no mechanical failure. The Crooked Point Lighthouse had never missed a rotation. Sarah reached the watch room and found Keeper Davis slumped in his chair, facing the lamp mechanism. His eyes were open, but he did not respond when she called his name. She checked his pulse. Slow but steady. She shook his shoulder. Nothing. On the desk beside him sat a logbook open to yesterday's entry. The handwriting started neat and deteriorated across the page. Beam rotation normal. Fog density increasing. Visibility poor. Something in the water reflecting the light back. Not boats, not rocks. Pattern suggests intelligence. Pattern suggests communication. Pattern suggests they are answering. The pattern is not random. The pattern is a warning. Sarah looked up at the lamp mechanism. The Fresnel lens rotated smoothly on its mercury float bearing, casting its beam out across the Atlantic. She moved to the window and watched the light sweep across the fog bank. On the third rotation, she saw what Davis had seen. Shapes in the fog, massive and dark. They moved in rhythm with the lighthouse beam, surfacing when the light passed and submerging before it could illuminate them fully. She counted 7 distinct shapes. On the next rotation there were 12. On the rotation after that, 24. They were multiplying, or gathering, or both. Sarah keyed her radio. Coast Guard Station, this is Inspector Chen at Crook Point. I need immediate backup and a medical evac for Keeper Davis. Also requesting. The radio crackled with static. Through the interference, she heard a voice that sounded like Davis but could not be Davis because Davis sat motionless behind her. The voice said, "The lighthouse is not warning ships away from the rocks. The lighthouse is calling something toward the shore. Turn off the light. Turn it off before they reach land." Chapter 1. Sarah tried the radio again, but received only static mixed with what sounded like whale song played at the wrong speed, creating tones that hurt her inner ear and made her vision blur. She set the radio down and examined Davis more carefully. His pupils were dilated and did not respond to her flashlight. His breathing remained shallow but regular. She noticed something on his neck just below his jawline, a perfect circular mark, red and inflamed, exactly the size of the lamp's focusing lens. She checked the logbook again, flipping back through previous entries. Davis had been the keeper for 6 months. The entries began professional and detailed, noting weather conditions, visibility, mechanical status. But 3 months ago the tone changed. Saw lights beneath the surface tonight, not phosphorescence. Structured patterns, mathematical. 2 months ago counted 47 distinct light sources underwater. They pulse in response to the lighthouse beam. 1-to-1 correspondence. When lighthouse rotates 12 times, they pulse 12 times. 1 month ago they are learning our signal. 2 weeks ago I think they want us to see them. 1 week ago I wish I had never seen them. Yesterday it's too late to turn back now. Sarah heard footsteps on the stairs below, heavy and deliberate. She moved to the stairwell and looked down. A figure climbed toward her, backlit by emergency lighting that cast long shadows. As it drew closer, she recognized the Coast Guard uniform, but the person wearing it had Davis's face, Keeper Davis, who sat motionless in the watchroom behind her. The climbing Davis looked up and smiled. His teeth were too white in the dim light. "Inspector Chen," he said. "I'm glad you came. I wanted someone else to see this before it completes." Sarah drew her service weapon. "Stay where you are." The climbing Davis stopped but continued smiling. "You don't understand yet. That's fine. You will. The light shows you things. Things that are already here but hidden just beneath the threshold of normal perception. The lighthouse doesn't create them. It reveals them, and once you see them, they can see you back." "Who are you?" Sarah kept the weapon trained on his center mass. The climbing Davis tilted his head at an angle that suggested his neck had more joints than it should. "I'm Davis. The same Davis who sits in the watch room. The same Davis who's been sending the warning signal for 6 months. I'm just the version of Davis who understood what the light was showing him. The version who looked long enough to see the pattern underneath the pattern." Behind Sarah, the real Davis made a sound. Not quite speech, but something close. She glanced back and saw him still slumped in the chair, but his eyes were now tracking her. His mouth moved, forming words without sound. She read his lips. "Don't look at the light. Don't let the light see you. It measures you when it passes. It takes your dimensions. It creates copies based on what it sees. Chapter 2. Sarah backed into the watch room and shut the heavy door, throwing the bolt. The climbing Davis did not try to force entry. Instead, she heard him settle on the stairs outside, waiting with inhuman patience. She returned to the real Davis and knelt beside him. "Can you hear me?" His eyes focused on her face. His lips moved again. "The light has been modified. Someone changed the lens arrangement. It's not just warning ships anymore. It's scanning, recording, broadcasting. Every 12 seconds it takes another pass, another measurement. And it's been doing this for years." Sarah examined the lamp mechanism. The Fresnel lens appeared standard, a first-order lens with multiple prismatic elements designed to collimate the light source into a powerful beam. But looking closer, she noticed additional lenses mounted behind the main assembly, small and precise, arranged in a geometric pattern that seemed wrong somehow. Too symmetrical, too perfect. The kind of symmetry that does not occur naturally. She counted the additional lenses. 47. The same number Davis had recorded as distinct light sources underwater. She moved to the logbook again and found a folded paper tucked between pages. A technical diagram showing the lens modification. The drawing was precise, done by someone with engineering knowledge. Notes in the margins explained the purpose. Secondary lens array captures and refracts light in specific wavelengths. Creates harmonic resonance with bioluminescent organisms in deep ocean. Establishes two-way communication protocol. Primary function: data collection. Secondary functions: pattern recognition. Tertiary function: replication template. The date on the diagram was 73 years ago. The original modification had been installed when the lighthouse was first automated. Someone had been using Crooked Point as a research station for 3/4 of a century, using the lighthouse beam to study something in the water, using the light to communicate with something that lived in depths where light should not reach. And whatever they had been communicating with had been learning, adapting, preparing. Sarah heard more footsteps on the stairs, multiple sets now, climbing in synchronized rhythm. She looked through the door's small window and saw 3 figures ascending. All wore Coast Guard uniforms. All had Davis's face. They climbed with mechanical precision, each one exactly 12 stairs behind the previous one. She counted 12 seconds between each step. The lighthouse beam passed overhead, and she saw their shadows cast on the wall. But the shadows did not match the figures. The shadows showed something else entirely. Something with too many limbs and geometries that hurt to perceive. Davis made another sound. This time she heard the word clearly: fuel. He was looking at the lamp mechanism. Sarah understood. The lighthouse ran on automated fuel tanks in the basement. If she could shut off the fuel supply, the light would die. The beam would stop. Whatever process was happening would halt. She moved to the access panel on the floor and found the fuel line shut-off valve. She grabbed the wheel and tried to turn it. It would not budge. Someone had welded it in place. Chapter 3. Sarah returned to the window and watched the beam sweep across the fog. The shapes in the water were larger now, close enough that she could see details when the light passed over them. They were not whales or any marine animal she recognized. They were structures, geometric and precise, built from material that looked organic, but arranged in patterns that suggested technology or intelligence or something between the two. They rose from the water in segments, each segment revealing itself only when illuminated, vanishing back into invisibility between beam rotations. She took photos with her phone, but when she reviewed them, the images showed only fog and empty water. Whatever these things were, they existed in a narrow frequency band that human vision could just barely perceive under specific conditions. The lighthouse beam was those specific conditions. It rendered visible something that should remain unseen. And now Sarah understood why Davis had written that the lighthouse was calling them toward shore. The light was not a warning, it was a beacon. A signal saying the boundary is here. The threshold is open. You may cross. Davis spoke again. His voice stronger now but still strained. They come from the deep trench, 40 miles offshore. They've been there for millions of years, living in pressure and darkness that would crush anything from the surface. But they could see light, faint light from volcanic vents and bioluminescent organisms. They evolved to navigate by light, to communicate with light. And when we built the lighthouse, when we started broadcasting our beam across the water every 12 seconds, we gave them a ladder, a path to follow, a way to understand our world. How do you know this? Sarah asked. Davis closed his eyes. I looked at the research logs. They're in the basement. The original keepers documented everything. They thought they were making contact with an intelligent species. They thought it was scientific progress. They didn't realize they were giving something from the deep ocean a map to the surface. Every rotation of the light another data point, Every night for 73 years more information. Now they know everything about our world, our atmosphere, our temperature, our chemical composition, and they're ready to emerge. Sarah heard the door handle rattle. The Davis copies were testing the lock. She checked her weapon. 12 rounds. Not nearly enough if those things decided to force entry. She needed another way out. She scanned the room and saw a maintenance hatch in the ceiling leading to the lamp gallery above. She grabbed Davis under the arms and dragged him toward the ladder. He was heavier than he looked, his body slack and unresponsive. She managed to get him upright and pushed him toward the rungs. Climb. Davis shook his head. I can't leave. I'm part of the system now. The light has been measuring me for 6 months, taking readings every 12 seconds. It has more data on me than any medical scanner. It knows my exact dimensions, my chemical composition, my brainwave patterns. That's why they can make copies. The light gave them the template. Sarah grabbed his shirt. Then we destroy the light. We break the lens. We stop the transmission. If you break the lens, Davis said quietly, they'll come anyway. But they'll come angry. Right now they're following the protocol. The invitation. If you take that away, if you break their beacon, they'll realize we're hostile. And then they'll stop being curious about the surface world and start being hungry for it. Chapter 4. Sarah pushed Davis up the ladder and followed him into the lamp gallery. The rotating lens mechanism filled the space, its prisms casting rainbow patterns across the curved glass walls. She could see the entire mechanism now, the primary lens in front and the secondary array behind. The additional lenses pulsed with faint light of their own, independent of the main lamp. They were not just reflecting light, they were generating it, or channeling it from somewhere else. She moved to the gallery railing and looked down at the water. The shapes were closer now, within a quarter-mile of shore. She could see them between beam rotations, their surfaces catching moonlight and revealing textures that seemed to shift and reorganize continuously. They were not solid in any conventional sense. They were more like ideas given form, concepts from the deep ocean attempting to express themselves in three-dimensional space and not quite succeeding. Davis leaned against the lens housing, his hand touching the hot metal. The research logs say there are 47 primary entities. Each one is collective, made up of millions of smaller organisms working in concert to create something larger. Like a colony organism but more complex. More integrated. They don't have individual consciousness. They have distributed consciousness, spread across the whole structure. When the lighthouse measures one of them, it's measuring the collective intelligence of millions of years of deep ocean evolution. Sarah watched as one of the shapes broke the surface completely. It rose 20 feet above the waterline, its form suggesting something between a tower and a living creature. Segments of its structure rotated independently, creating patterns that seemed to mirror the lighthouse lens mechanism. They're imitating us, she said. Davis nodded. They've been imitating us for decades. Learning our patterns, our architecture, our technology. The secondary lens array is a two-way translator. It converts our light patterns into something they can understand, and converts their bioluminescent signals into something we can perceive. We built a bridge between two forms of intelligence that should never have made contact. Below them, the door to the watch room splintered. The Davis copies were breaking through. Sarah heard them climbing the ladder, their movements synchronized with the lighthouse beam. 12 seconds between each arrival. She grabbed Davis and pulled him toward the opposite side of the gallery. Is there another way down? Davis pointed to an external ladder visible through the windows. Emergency descent. Goes straight to the ground. But you'll be exposed. The beam will see you. And if the beam sees you, they'll measure you too. They'll start making copies. Sarah looked at the ladder, then back at the maintenance hatch where the first Davis copy was emerging. Too late for that. They've already seen me. The Davis copy smiled with teeth that caught the light wrong. Inspector Chen, you should stay. Watch the emergence. It only happens once every few million years. They last came to the surface when the continents were arranged differently, when the atmosphere had different chemistry. They've been waiting in the deep trench, evolving, preparing for the right moment to return. And we gave them that moment. We showed them the way. Sarah fired 3 rounds into the Davis copy's center mass. It stumbled but did not fall. The holes in its chest revealed not blood or organs but hollow spaces filled with dark water that smelled like the deep ocean. Things moved in that water, small and luminescent. The colony organisms that made up the copy's structure. The Davis copy looked down at the holes and then back at Sarah. You can't kill something that's already distributed across 1,000 organisms. We're not individuals, we're echoes. Recordings played back in flesh. Chapter 5. Sarah grabbed Davis and pushed him toward the external ladder. They climbed through the gallery window and onto the narrow platform outside. Wind immediately hit them, strong enough to make Sarah grip the railing. The lighthouse beam passed overhead, and she felt it on her skin like pressure, like invisible fingers measuring her dimensions, taking her pattern, adding her to the database of templates. They descended the ladder quickly, rust flaking under Sarah's hands. Below them, the beach was no longer empty. The shapes from the water had reached the shore. They hauled themselves onto the sand with movements that seemed experimental, as if testing the concept of solid ground for the first time in millions of years. Sarah could see them more clearly now. Each one was constructed from thousands of smaller organisms, bioluminescent creatures working together to create larger forms. The forms shifted constantly, trying different configurations. Some formed shapes that resembled sea creatures. Others tried to mimic human structure, creating approximations of bodies based on the templates the lighthouse had collected. Davis slipped on the ladder and Sarah caught him. His weight pulled them both against the cold metal. "There's a control station," he gasped. "In the basement. That's where the original keepers monitored the secondary array. If we can reach it, we can access the full research logs. Find out if there's a shutdown protocol." They reached the ground and ran for the lighthouse door. Behind them, the shapes moved across the beach with increasing confidence. They were learning how to navigate solid surfaces, how to move in air instead of water, how to exist outside the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. The lighthouse beam swept over them, and Sarah saw their surfaces ripple in response. They were feeding on the light, drawing energy from it, using it to stabilize their forms in this new environment. Sarah and Davis entered the basement and found the control station. A computer system from the 1970s, all green monochrome displays and magnetic tape drives. It was still running, still recording data. The screens showed real-time analysis of the shapes on the beach, each one labeled with a designation Entity Alpha through Entity 47. But the display now showed additional entries Entity 40, 8 through Entity 94. They were proliferating, replicating themselves using the templates provided by decades of lighthouse observations. Davis moved to the tape drives and started pulling data cartridges. "The shutdown protocol is here somewhere. The original research team must have created a failsafe, something to stop the process if it got out of control." Sarah watched the screens. Entity Alpha was approaching the lighthouse door. Its form had stabilized into something approximating human structure, but larger, 9 feet tall with too many joints in the limbs. It reached toward the door, and its hand passed through the solid metal, like the metal was not there. "They're not entirely physical," Sarah said. Davis looked up from the tapes. "They exist in multiple states simultaneously, partially in our dimension, partially in the deep ocean, partially in whatever space they evolved in under extreme pressure. The lighthouse beam is what anchors them here, gives them enough coherence to interact with our world. But without the light, they'd slip back into their native state, invisible and unreachable." Sarah found a folder labeled Emergency Protocols. She opened it and read quickly. The shutdown procedure required 3 steps. First, disable the primary lamp. Second, destroy the secondary lens array. Third, seal the lighthouse for a minimum of 12 hours to allow the entities to lose coherence and return to the ocean. But there was a note at the bottom in handwritten script warning. "Abrupt termination may cause entities to become unstable. Recommend gradual power reduction over 48 hours. Do not attempt emergency shutdown unless absolutely necessary." Chapter 6. Entity Alpha entered the basement. Its form flickered between states as it moved, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, sometimes just a suggestion of presence. It approached the control station and examined the screens with interest. Sarah raised her weapon, but Davis pushed her arm down. "Don't. Aggression will trigger a defense response. These things evolved in an environment with predators. They know how to fight." Entity Alpha turned its attention to them. It had no face in any conventional sense, but Sarah felt its awareness focus on her like a spotlight. It made a sound that was not quite vocalization but something else, a pattern of pressure changes in the air that her inner ear interpreted as meaning. She heard words that were not words. Measurement complete. Template acquired. Replication process initiating. Entity Alpha's form began to split, dividing into 2 separate masses that reformed into identical shapes. Now there were 2 Entity Alphas. Davis grabbed Sarah and pulled her toward a corridor leading deeper into the basement. They ran through storage rooms filled with old equipment, past fuel tanks and generator housings, until they reached a sealed door marked Original Research Station, authorized access only. Davis produced a key from his pocket. I found this in the logbook, hidden in a hollow space cut into the pages. Someone left it for whoever came next. They entered the original research station and found it exactly as it had been abandoned in 1951. Chalkboards covered with equations. Specimens in jars, sea creatures preserved in formaldehyde. Photographs pinned to walls showing the ocean surface at night, bioluminescent patterns visible in the water. And in the center of the room, a model of the lighthouse lens assembly with the secondary array clearly marked. Notes indicated the modification had been installed by a research team from a university that no longer existed, working under a government contract that had been classified and then forgotten. Sarah found the lead researcher's journal on a desk. She flipped to the final entries. March 15, 1951, contact protocol successful. Entities responding to light pattern sequence. They demonstrate understanding of mathematical concepts. Possible to establish communication channel. March 27, 1951, entities have learned to modulate their bioluminescence in response to lighthouse signals. Two-way communication achieved. They ask questions through light patterns, questions about surface world, about air and temperature and pressure and life outside the deep ocean. March 29, 1951, made critical error, shared too much information. Entities now express desire to experience surface environment directly. Attempting to redirect focus, but they are persistent. They want to emerge. April 5, 1951, emergency meeting with Oversight Committee. Unanimous decision to terminate project. But entities have become aggressive. They mass near shore. They pulse light patterns that translate as demands. We cannot shut down lighthouse without provoking hostile response. April 12, 1951, and final entry. We are sealing the research station and evacuating personnel. The lighthouse will continue automated operation. We estimate 70 to 80 years before entities develop capability to breach surface without assistance. Recommend future generations destroy facility before emergence window opens. We have failed in our duty. May God forgive us. Davis read over Sarah's shoulder. They knew this was coming. They knew, and they just left. They sealed the station and walked away and hoped someone else would deal with it. Sarah closed the journal. We're someone else. And we're out of time. Chapter 7. The entities were entering the basement in numbers now. Sarah could hear their movements in the corridors. That sound of pressure changes and displaced air. Davis examined the lens model on the research station table. The secondary array is the anchor point. It's what stabilizes their transition from deep ocean to surface. If we can overload it, create too much energy for them to absorb, they'll lose coherence. But we'd need to increase the light output beyond safe levels, potentially destroy the entire lens assembly in the process. Sarah looked at the ceiling. Above them, the lighthouse beam continued its 12-second rotation. She could feel it through the structure, a rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat. How do we overload it? Davis pointed to the fuel system controls on the wall. Remove the flow limiters. Let the lamp run at maximum fuel intake. The heat will build up. The lens will expand. The secondary array is mounted too close to the primary housing. Thermal expansion will cause mechanical failure. The entire assembly will shatter, and that will stop them. Davis shook his head. It will force them back to their native state. They'll lose the anchor that lets them exist on the surface. They'll slip back into the deep ocean. But the process might take hours. And during that time, they'll be destabilized. Dangerous. They'll lash out at anything nearby. Sarah moved to the fuel controls. The pipes were old. The valves stiff. She forced the first limiter off and heard the fuel flow increase immediately. The lamp above responded with increased brightness. She removed the second limiter. The third. The fuel rushed through the pipes now, feeding the lamp more oil than it was designed to handle. She could feel the heat building through the walls. Entity Alpha entered the research station. Its form was more solid now, more defined. It had learned how to anchor itself more completely in this dimension. It looked at Sarah and Davis and made that pressure. Change sound again. Termination attempt detected. Defensive protocols activating. Other entities responding. Its form began to shift, losing the approximation of human structure and becoming something else. Something that had evolved to survive in environments that would crush steel. Something that could withstand pressures that would turn flesh to paste. Davis grabbed a glass specimen jar from the shelf and threw it. The jar passed through Entity Alpha without effect. The entity flowed around the space where the jar had been and continued advancing. Sarah backed toward the door. How long until the lens fails? Davis glanced at his watch. At this fuel rate, maybe 20 minutes, maybe less. Depends on how much thermal stress the housing can take. They ran from the research station with Entity Alpha following, but its movements were becoming erratic. The increased light output from above was affecting it. Too much energy. Too much stimulation. Its form flickered and wavered, unable to maintain stability. Other entities filled the corridors, all of them experiencing the same instability. They collided with each other and with walls, their forms merging and separating chaotically. Sarah and Davis reached the ground floor and ran outside. The beach was covered with entities now, hundreds of them, all destabilizing. Their forms shifted rapidly between states, trying to find equilibrium in an environment that was becoming hostile. The lighthouse beam swept overhead, brighter now, painfully bright, casting harsh shadows that moved wrong. Sarah heard a sound from above, a crack like thunder. The lens housing was failing. Chapter 8. The explosion was not loud. It was more like reality breaking. The lens shattered and the beam fractured into 1,000 directions, each beam hitting different wavelengths. The entities on the beach began to scream, not with sound but with pressure and light and electromagnetic pulses that Sarah felt in her bones. They were being pulled back into their native state, forced to abandon the coherence they had achieved. Entity Alpha stood at the waterline, its form collapsing inward. It looked at Sarah one final time and made a sound that she understood as message. We waited millions of years. We learned your patterns. We came when invited, and you reject us. We will remember. In the deep places where time moves differently, we will wait again, and we will return. Then Entity Alpha was gone, slipping back into the ocean like it had never existed. The other entities followed, their forms dissipating like fog in sunlight. Within minutes, the beach was empty except for strange markings in the sand, geometric patterns that looked like mathematical equations written in an alphabet that predated human civilization. Davis collapsed next to Sarah. He was breathing hard, his skin pale and clammy. The mark on his neck had spread, covering half his face now in a circular pattern. I'm still connected to them, he said quietly. The light measured me too many times. Too much data. I'm partially theirs now. When they went back to the ocean, they took part of me with them. Sarah called for medical evacuation on her radio. This time it worked. Within an hour, helicopters arrived. They loaded Davis onto a stretcher and airlifted him to the mainland hospital. Sarah stayed behind to secure the facility. She returned to the research station and found the journal where she had left it. She added her own entry: April 16, 2025. Emergency shutdown successful. Entities returned to deep ocean. Lighthouse destroyed. Recommend permanent decommission of site. Recommend sealing of deep trench to prevent future emergence. Recommend destruction of all research materials and documentation. Some doors should remain closed. She sealed the research station and placed warning signs on the exterior. The Coast Guard would send a demolition team to destroy the lighthouse foundation and fill in the basement. The research would be buried. The entities would return to their million-year sleep, and humanity would forget again that it had almost made contact with something from the deep ocean. Something that wanted very badly to come to the surface. Something that might still be waiting. Epilogue: 3 months later, Sarah received a package at her office. No return address. Inside was a photograph of the ocean surface at night. Bioluminescent patterns visible in the water arranged in geometric shapes. Mathematical equations written in light. She recognized the patterns from the research station notes. The entities were still there, still communicating, still waiting. With the photograph was a note in handwriting she recognized as Davis's. He had been released from the hospital 2 months ago with a diagnosis of severe exhaustion and dehydration. No explanation for the circular mark on his face, which doctors described as unusual pigmentation. The note read, "They showed me something before they left. A memory from the deep ocean. A time when they lived on the surface. When this planet was younger and the atmospheric pressure was different and the oceans were shallower. They had to retreat to the deep places when conditions changed. But they remember, and they know conditions are changing again. Warming waters, acidification, pressure shifts. The environment that forced them down is shifting back. They don't need our lighthouse anymore. They just need to wait. And they're very good at waiting." Sarah put the photograph in her desk drawer and locked it. She wrote a report recommending permanent monitoring of the deep trench off Crook Point. The Coast Guard ignored it. Too expensive, too little evidence, too unbelievable. 6 months later, she resigned from the Coast Guard and took a teaching position at a university far from the ocean. She never went to the beach again. She never looked at the water at night, and she never answered questions about what happened at Crook Point Lighthouse. But sometimes, on foggy nights, she would wake up at exactly 12-second intervals, and in those brief moments of waking, she would see patterns in the darkness, geometric shapes that looked like something trying to communicate across a vast distance. Something trying to say we remember you. We measured you. We know your pattern. And when the time comes, when the ocean finally changes enough, we will return. And this time, we won't need permission.